So, Adam, can you tell me a little bit more about your journey and how you got started in the marketing industry?
Yeah, so well, I think it all started in sales of all things, and I was managing a an LA Fitness in Florida, and so that's my first kind of deep dive into sales. It was actually a really heavy, hardcore sales training. I guess, environment, if you want to look at it that way. And so, I started doing the selling and all that other stuff. And then I saw a ad on YouTube. And I think a lot of people saw that ad of Ty Lopez saying, "Hey guys, here in my garage, just got this new Lamborghini. But you know what I like more than this new Lamborghini are these 65 and a half bookshelves that I have behind me and I had installed while I was on vacation." And I was like, dude, I want the Lambo. I don't want the bookshelves. Although I do have one behind me. Can't see it though. Not as big, but still has a pretty decent amount of cool books inside of it though. And um, and so it really intrigued me with his whole approach, and he was talking about how to run an SMMA and how to run people's ads as a business and start a business. And I didn't even really think about even owning my own business at that point. And so it just kind of started making my brain tick a little bit, and I was like, man, I'm really interested in it. And I click on his ad, and it's like 2 grand, and I'm like, I'm not spending 2 grand on this guy who just bought a new Lamborghini and loves books, like I'm not doing that. So I ended up finding a course online, and I think I finished like 70% of the course, and I was just really pumped. And I'm like, dude, I'm going to call someone. I don't really know much about advertising at this point. This is back in 2015, 2016. But I'm going to call. I know how to sell, and so I called a junk removal company in Jensen Beach, Florida. It was just a random cold call, no specific industry in mind. And I said, hey, my name's Adam. This is what we do. We can run your ads. And he goes, well, how much do you charge? And I said, we charge 1,000 a month. And he goes, well, I'll pay you 500 now. If you can get me likes, I'll pay you the other 500. And that was like in 15 minutes. And so I was like, oh, there's something to this. So that's kind of what started the journey initially, was how much of a need there is out there, which is why, inevitably kind of led us down the road of CMO Lift also.
Awesome. So, moving on a bit then. So, could you tell me what your specific approach or methodology is as a marketer? Is there anything you do differently to maybe what the industry standard is?
Yeah, I've seen, because a lot of people think that the industry standard is this. Someone, kind of sees what I saw back in 2015, 2016. They're like, oh, this is awesome, right? And they, follow some course's guideline on how to sell. And, what that course does is it teaches them how to sell the service of an ad agency. And most people are doing this from an ad agency perspective. And so when it comes to um, how we do things, everything we do is data driven. And so we've built a large language model that actually has the ability to go in and directly target the people who have searched for someone's service or product in the last 24 to 48 hours, because essentially the way that advertising is done now is you go to Facebook, for example, and you set your campaign objective to lead generation. You do a lead form, and then once you do the lead form, you go to the targeting. And let's say you're doing a solar campaign, for example, you're going to target people who like Tesla. You're going to target people who like Toyota Prius or Rivian, or however you pronounce it. Um, and and then you just run the ad, right? You do a 30-mile radius of this, and you target 35 to 65 plus, and that's the extent of it. And effectively, what Facebook or Meta now has become is really just a really easy to use billboard, because you can't be as exact with targeting anymore. You can't target people who are homeowners or people who live in Dallas, Texas. You can only target people who live in Dallas, Texas, and people who have visited Dallas, Texas, which, by the way, big tourist area. So, if you go in and you say, well, I want to sell real estate, and you're advertising to people in New York who just visited Dallas, it doesn't really make much sense. So our approach is all data driven.
Awesome. Love that. Could you then share a success story you might have from a previous campaign or client that you've worked with that you're especially proud of?
Yeah, I'd say one of the bigger ones was a dental office in Gainesville, Georgia. There's a very heavy Hispanic population there, and the doctor that hired us, he had actually owned eight dental locations in the past, and he retired, sold all of them, and exited out. And he wanted to build something for his son because his son was kind of following in his footsteps and saying, "Hey, I want to become." A dentist, right? And so he started this dental practice. It was a single location, and he didn't even have carpet in the building. Like we met up, we talked about what direction he wanted to go in, what his ideal client looked like. We built his whole avatar, and then we started crafting the messaging to be pointed to his avatar. And so the funny thing is, he didn't speak Spanish either. He was actually from India. So patient, his entire like all his entire I guess clientele is all Spanish, and he doesn't speak any Spanish at all.
Oh
And
dear.
so yeah, his dental assistants do, but it's interesting how you can point a company in a direction, and if you execute the brand, and if you execute the messaging, and you have a great offer, and you combine all those together, and you have data to support all of it and to target people, it's amazing how fast it can go. We ended up before he even opened, we fully booked him out for 3 weeks straight.
Wow. Have you ever had a client that thought they had a great product to offer and you disagreed? And how did you address that with them?
I don't think because obviously a lot of products exist that are good or are not good, right? And it's not up to me to say whether or not a product's good or not. I think a product exists because it serves a certain market, and if you can identify that market, which a lot of people have problems doing, and you have great messaging behind it, and you have a great offer, it really doesn't matter what I think or what the person who owns the business thinks, as long as it serves that market that we're advertising to. It'll work. So, for example, if you have two, not hot dog stands, but let's just say food carts, right? And you're in the middle of Miami Beach, it's 85 degrees and sunny, and there's a bunch of people out there. One food cart sells hot chocolate, and the other one sells ice cream, right? Two polar opposites. So obviously the person with ice cream, they may have a really bad flavor of ice cream, but it doesn't really matter because people are going to be interested anyway, and they're going to be taking a look because those people like ice cream. Now, if you take it a step further and you go specifically to a place of people who like ice cream and it's 85 degrees, then that offer becomes even more attractive, right, to those people. Versus, let's say you have hot chocolate and it's 85 degrees out. No one wants that, right? So it all depends on a number of different factors. You could have the best hot chocolate in the world, but if it's 100 degrees, no one's gonna do it.
I think it can always be quite tricky to, especially in the early days, sometimes people have a really clear understanding of their ICP and who they're trying to reach, but some people also kind of cast their net wider and then narrow down. Do you think there's a best practice in when you're trying to go from 0 to 1?
I think if you don't have data, casting a wide net and narrowing down after that would be the best fit. But if you have the data, you can kind of skip all that.
And then in a similar vein, what are some of the common mistakes that you see companies making in their marketing strategies in the early days of a product launch?
Um, I wouldn't necessarily say a product launch
Mhm.
because again, that comes down to offer, right?
Sure.
For example, no one knew who we were. We ended up signing 370 plus clients, and people still don't know who we are, right? And so I don't really think a startup is as um, disadvantaged as someone who has longevity, because there's a bunch of companies right now that are being created that take over markets overnight. It seems like, right?
Mm.
If people are not necessarily narrow minded, but short term thinking. A lot of companies that we work with tend to follow what the industry they're in are doing. So, for example, insurance agents love to buy lists. They love to buy lead lists. Doesn't matter how opted in they are. They don't like to do lead generation. They just love to buy a list and they like to call. Maybe they don't like to call, but that's just what the industry does, right? And they just want to follow those footsteps. And so, I think it all comes down to how people go about doing business. And a lot of times they're just thinking very short term as to what's going to tide me over to next season, next year. How many leads can I get this week to get me through this month? Because it all comes down to the economy as well. And a lot of times, especially depending on how much revenue or that some company is doing at that point in time, closely resembles what's happening in the economy too. A lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck. So they're just focused on how can I pay my bills this week versus, hey, how can I set myself up to have a foundation and move in a direction that's going to, kind of propel me forward and not have to worry about, well, what am I doing this week to this week? Because there's no planning involved, which leads to ad agencies reaching out and saying, hey, I can guarantee you 100 appointments or your money back, right? And I'm sure there's some, long, drawn out, small print that they don't read and they end up signing up and it's a repeating cycle. And I hear it every single day. Hey, had a really bad experience. I just don't think that works because of exactly what I just said. And so I don't think it's necessarily a failed product launch or a bad product or, maybe it's bad messaging and a bad offer. But if it's data driven and you have data that says, I mean, how do people get to the moon? I think that's a really good explanation, right? How is it that someone down here on Earth can measure exactly how far away the moon is, how far away it's moving away from us every year, right? And it's all data. And if you just launched a rocket, you aimed it at the moon without data, you're probably going to miss the mark. Yeah.
That's an amazing way of putting it. Okay, then let me ask you this. What's the best success story or campaign that you've seen in history? It doesn't have to be a client of yours. An
Hmm.
example like Athletic Greens, they totally killed it. I
Yeah.
remember in the early days of Monday.com, I just saw them absolutely everywhere. They were on
Yep.
YouTube ads, they were on display ads. Like I just could not stop seeing their ads. So yeah,
Well,
do you have
that's
people
blitzing,
in mind?
right? Yeah, if you're going into like a marketing blitz, like blitz scaling, that's a great book. It's in my one bookshelf behind me. But blitz scaling is a really good way to do it, and a lot of times that's how these companies start to get massive growth. I mean, look at Sasquatch soaps, right? Everyone saw the soap you shower with, right? That whole ad. That's a phenomenal ad. I think last time I looked, it had like 9 or 12 million views.
Wow.
Yeah. So you want to talk about reach like that? That is a solid one. And in fact, on our Facebook page, we post different things that are creative. So for example, Pepsi had one a while ago, and it was probably one of the best ads I've ever seen. And if someone wants to check it out, it's on our Facebook page, CMO Lift. But it was an answer to um, people saying that Coke sold more cans of Coke or more cans of soda than Pepsi did. And so what Pepsi did is they had a kid walk around the corner, put a quarter in the machine, buy a Coke, put it on the ground, put a quarter in the machine, buy another Coke, put it on the ground. The kid stepped up on top of both the Cokes and bought a Pepsi,
I
right?
saw that. That was genius. I loved
Yeah.
it.
And he's like, look, for every two Cokes, it's worth one Pepsi, right?
Oh,
And so
genius.
I was like, man, that is such a great ad. And you want to talk about messaging and branding? There was another one that Pepsi did. Um, there was another one that Pepsi did where it was just a blue background. It had the Pepsi logo, and the Pepsi logo, the newer one is like red, white, and blue, and the white is like a sliver, like wave looking thing. Well, they replaced the wave looking thing with a Lay's potato chip, and it said these two go great together. And I'm like, that's great. There's so many different good examples there. The point is that they had a team behind them that actually knew what they were doing. There was an insurance company, I think, in the UK that ran an ad and it said, if you Google insurance, you'll find us on page 3. We focus on insurance, not anything else. And I was like, that's a great ad too. So, there's a lot of different things out there that get people's attention and get the message across.
Wow, this is really inspiring as at my own company, we think about the launch of our upcoming product and how we want to, how we want to get creative with positioning this and reaching people. It's always really fun in the early days because I mean the sky's kind of the limit, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have like a board to go and say, "Hey, can we do this? Can we do that?" And I think that ties the hands behind or ties the hands of the company a lot of times, and that's why these startups start to scale up so quick is because
Hmm.
they can have the flexibility of doing this or doing that. Like look at Domino's. Everyone thinks they're a pizza company. They're a marketing company.
Hmm.
That's I feel like that's where all this is going to. If you want to kind of look more forward, Amazon, DoorDash, Uber Eats, they're all taking market share from these companies and they're charging a premium to have that attention there. And so a lot of these companies are trying to find ways to build their own platform, get their own companies back, like Red Bull or even Domino's, right? And if you look at it, I mean, it's kind of like six eggs one way, half a dozen the other, because DoorDash makes it so simple, where all they do is charge 30%. You don't have to worry about payroll, you don't have to worry about liability, and you have an automatic delivery service to deliver whatever it is that you want. And so there's value there to both the business and the consumer, but they also lose out on market share too, because DoorDash has their customer, not them.
Yeah, no, that's another awesome example. I think we could go on about this
Yeah,
on end, but at least we have some more upcoming sessions to talk about that. But
sure.
I want to talk about market shifts and trends. Which ones are you currently paying attention to, and what's exciting you?
Yeah, the trend now is data because data is becoming it was important back when Facebook started. It's still important today, but with all the new regulations with the FCC and the TCPA, there's a lot of things that you have to make sure that your company abides by. AI is a big one. There's a lot of fear and uncertainty when it comes to AI. For example, AI calling is one of the things that we recommend, and a lot of people heard about the law change that happened where they think AI calling is illegal and it's not. You just have to make sure that your stuff is opted into properly. And a lot of companies just don't take the time to do it because of short term thinking, right? They're just worried about, oh, I can't cold call using AI anymore. Well, okay, let's just scrap that. And let's just go back to finding an agency that guarantees 100 appointments and then we'll fire them 2 months later. So it's a lot of times it's just, what is going to get me the most amount of business now, not necessarily setting them up for, having a system in place where they don't have to worry about that moving forward. And data is a big part of that. So I think AI and data are going to become one of the main things that moves businesses forward and propels them and helps scale them out. So those are the two that I follow.
Yeah, 100%. And just to follow up to that question, as we look ahead, especially with everything that's happening in the space of AI, which tasks are going to be for AI and which tasks are going to be for humans? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah. I have a feeling that there's going to be a place for human written content because there's context that is missing. There's empathy that's missing, I feel, a lot of times. And there was a quote that I heard. Who was it? It was, I have it written down here. It's by Blair Warren. And it said, people will do anything for those who encourage their dreams, justify their failures, allay their fears, confirm their suspicions, and help them throw rocks at their enemies. And I think AI does a great job of piecing together kind of like a skeleton of what to expect. So, for example, blogs or something along the lines of that. But there's also got to be a human element too. And that's a very complex thing to figure out. Like we don't even know how our brain works, let alone how AI works. And so if we expect that AI is going to take over a couple things, maybe it takes over copywriting, maybe it takes over, driving from point A to point B without, doing anything, crazy like that. I think there's going to be a lot of industries that it revolutionizes, and I think it's going to um, probably create more industries and more in different roles that people don't even know exist now. And so it's exciting. It's scary because no one really understands what's happening or moving forward, how it's going to look. But I'm excited. I think it's going to do nothing but help businesses and um, probably just everyone in general.
For sure. I mean, we have to embrace change, right? Otherwise, we stagnate and we're out of
Exactly.
here.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
had two more questions for you, Adam. I know we
Yep.
have a few minutes left. I want to be respectful of your time.
Sure.
What inspired you to start CMO Lift, and what are your goals for the company moving forward?
Yeah. So Um, I think it goes back to kind of my mindset, my thought process growing up. We grew up dirt poor, right? Like jumping over holes in a single wide trailer, getting to my room at night, heating the house with the oven, that sort of thing. And there was a moment where maybe when I was like 7 or 8, and I didn't have a cell phone. Maybe my mom did, and my dad did, or something like that. And at that point, my parents were separated. But there was a birthday where no one wished me a happy birthday. My mom didn't, she was busy going to work, and she said, hey, bye, good luck, and, off on the school bus. No one at school knew it was my birthday. Facebook didn't remind anyone, right? That day, it was just kind of horrible, right? And so I got back from school. It was late, maybe like 7 or 8. And then my mom called me into our living room. So I go into the living room and it was like pitch black. And I was like, what's going on? Did you pay the light bill?
Oh,
But all you saw was a single candle and a cupcake, and she had sang me happy birthday. And it wasn't, a huge thing. It was a really nice gesture though, and it taught me the power of being appreciated and being seen, right? And I think a lot of companies fall into the line of that, especially when you're talking about being empathetic with your messaging. Fast forward to a previous career that I had mentioned earlier in LA Fitness, we had we had some people come in and they were talking about how there was a gym that was having financial problems. And so I was like, ooh, this is interesting because it's my first sales job. I was like super ready to go. We had hired, trained, and developed, I think it was like 3 or 4 people. And part of that was having them write down what they wanted to achieve financially within a certain amount of time. And that whole situation of the gym popped up, and we created a advertising strategy. We figured out what we were going to do, and we executed it. And unfortunately for that gym, they ended up shutting down. Right, it was bad for that gym owner, but ultimately it taught me a really valuable lesson of helping our team succeed. And when you help them achieve their goals, it helps you achieve yours as well, because obviously that helped me financially too. And so what I do now at CMO Lift is deeply rooted in those experiences and ones that are just like it. And so what we're trying to accomplish now is help those companies that may not have a budget for a full-time CMO. Maybe they need direction in terms of where to go, where to take their company, and how to do it properly. And that's what we're doing for companies.
I love that. Love your background. Love the mission. I think it's always really nice to hear, why somebody started a company and that there's actually meaning behind it, not just because you woke up one day and you were like, oh, today's a good day to
Friday.
start this. Like, there's a
Yeah,
reason for it. They're the kinds of entrepreneurs I want to back. So that's really, really awesome to hear. Thank you for sharing. I
sure.
have one more question for you before we jump
Mhm.
off. Short and sweet, what's your one piece of advice to aspiring marketers in this kind of current climate?
Yeah, stay curious and be data driven. I think those are the two things right there.
Nice and easy. Well,
Mhm.
Adam, pleasure speaking with you. Let's end it there, and I will see you next time.
All right.